No. Okay, so welcome, good morning. It's my pleasure to give the first presentation today about Virtual Language Observatory. And well, first, make sure that all connections are working. Yes, this will work. Okay, great. Okay, so we actually, when setting up the workshop, we more or less decided to do things somehow upside down, because in general, when giving kind of metadata workshop, we start with creation of metadata and then how to model things, how to really make the metadata records, and then how to use them. Today, we'll do it the other way around. We'll start with basically kind of the philosophical question, why is it useful to have metadata, and how does metadata how can metadata be exploited in the framework of CMDI, and what kind of tools do there exist to use and search in metadata. So in that respect, I hope we can work a bit in this paradigm, and then later on the day we will basically get back to the first steps in the whole process, let's say modeling the metadata and then creating the metadata records. Okay, so first a few things about the so-called Virtual Language Observatory. And in this presentation, I will try to explain you what exactly it is, how it is structured, and what the exact relation with CMDI, so the component metadata infrastructure, is. And then we'll go on with the questions, how can I get my data and my metadata inside the Virtual Language Observatory? And we'll have a look at a few demonstrations and do some very tiny exercises with it. Okay, so to sketch somehow the context of the Virtual Language Observatory, it is generally, let's say, seen that there are a lot of linguistic resources out there. Certainly these days, lots of digitized data is out there, and data could then mean like data collections like corpora, spoken corpora, text corpora, multimodal corpora, lexica, there are grammatic descriptions, grammars, there are multimedia recordings, and also these days you get all kind of mixes between these kind of language resources. So you have a kind of online grammar with links to, let's say, video corpus illustrating a particular feature of a specific language. Or you find a lexicon with a link to a corpus, again, to illustrate a certain lexical feature in a language. So the importance is basically to, of all these language resources, it's very important to make them available in an easy way, and also to make people aware that these language resources do exist. Because it's really a pity when you have them somewhere digitized on a server, but people do not know about them or cannot find them easily. Apart from these classical data collections and more modern data collections, there's also other linguistic resources like software. There are lots of web applications these days, web services to process language resources and to generate some results from them. And there are also the more, let's say, old school language resources like books, articles, CD-ROMs and DVDs spread around over libraries, be it classical libraries or digital libraries. So all in all, it's pretty much like a jungle these days. And for many researchers, it's not so easy to track down where exactly to find the resources and how to use them. So one of the classic questions you get then is, where do I start? I want to find a corpus, but where do I start? Do I start with a catalog of my local library, or do I start with Google? How do I find all these resources? How can I compare them? And if I have a very specific question, let's say I want to find a historic corpus of German of the 18th century, how can you basically get to the important resources in that respect? There's a second problem in there, that there is really a large amount of data. It's often referred to as the data tsunami, the digital data tsunami, because so many resources are being digitized. And there are just so many electronic resources out there nowadays. It's very hard to find your way in this tsunami of digital objects. So therefore, it was decided that because there is a clear need for a kind of single starting point to find a way in all the resources out there. It is important to have a kind of search portal to get to the metadata about these resources out there. And because there is this large amount of data, the idea was born to basically use a kind of facet search on the linguistic resources metadata. This basically comes down to kind of a drill down paradigm. You quickly can restrict the search space in which you're looking with a few clicks, and you can quickly try to get to an exact match of what you were looking for. And apart from that, there's also the possibility to have multiple ways to get into your data. So it means like there needs to be kind of full text search, Google-alike if you want to. There is this facets browsing mechanism, which I will get back to. And there are also some alternative ways of exploring the data. For instance, a geographic overlay by which you can, let's say, look on a map, click on a specific language point, for instance, that is situated somewhere on the map, and then go to the relevant resources about that language. All of this needed to be unified somehow in an interface, and there needed to be kind of portal, so to say, to get to these resources. And that's basically how the idea of the virtual language observatory was born. It has quite some analogy with some of the virtual observatories in the astronomy realm. So there also people have constructed a kind of virtual telescope, so to say, by which you can explore the skies, and then sitting behind your computer you can just, or in front of your computer you just can browse through the sky and get access to those astronomy image data in a very easy way. Basically we wanted to do the same, but then for language data. So, the Virtual Language Observatory. You can access the Virtual Language Observatory via www.clarin.eu/VLO. For the people in the room here, there is EduRoam access here, so if you have EduRoam on your computer, you should be able to get to the Wi-Fi through that. If you don't have EduRoam, I would advise to use the Clarin network, and the password is Clarin2012 in small characters. Okay, so on this website, clarin.eu/VLO, you will find several parts. I think in this context, the most important one is the facet browser, but just for completeness, I also quickly show the other ones. Okay, so yep, this is the page you will find when you go to the Virtual Language Observatory, and as you can see, there are these multiple options there. The one that we are going to talk about the most today, and which is also the closest related to the component metadata, is the first one, so the facets search. But there's also the virtual language world, so it's kind of Google Earth overlay, which makes a kind of connection between geographic information and the metadata out there. There is a more traditional catalog, and there's also this kind of LRT resource inventory. I'll get back to that later. But maybe to start, I'll quickly show the facet browser and the Google Earth overlay. Yep. So, okay. So this is basically the start page of the facets search within the Virtual Language Observatory. As you can see, there are multiple facets here. So there's, for instance, one collection, which basically gives you a possibility to restrict all the records to one specific collection. Could, for instance, be the Liederenbank in the Meertens Institute, or the Corpus of Endangered Languages here at the MPI, Corpus Gesproken Nederlands, Corpus Spoken Dutch is also here. So you basically can just click on one of these facets. Let's say we want to have a look at Corpus Gesproken Nederlands. Then you click on that facet and you will get we basically restrict the search space coming from 500 records, going back to 12,000 records. Very basic way of browsing through all the collections. As you can see, there are multiple facets here. There is a language facet, there is a continent facet, genre, country, subject, organization, resource type. National project, which is a recent addition. Basically, trying to give an overview about which resources are available in which national project. So for instance, if you want to see all the resources available in the context of CLARNL, you can click on CLARNL here. And then at the right-hand side here, you can find all the individual records. As you can see now, it gives a kind of overview about all the, about 500,000 metadata records which are currently available in the VLO. So it doesn't really make sense to browse through the whole list page by page. But it can be restricted quite easily. Let's say we want to have a look at the talk bank, which is an American corpus for spoken language. And you can quickly restrict, let's say we're interested in audio recordings. And now with 2 clicks, we already restricted the whole search space back to from 500,000 to 5,000. And then you can select on a specific language. Well, let's say we are interested in Dutch. And then we go back to 200 records. And then by clicking on one of these records, we will have a look at what exactly information there is available on this specific metadata record. So in here we see, let's say, the main metadata fields which are available for this specific record. And we see things like the name of this particular record, the description. So this is about Arabic learners of Dutch. It is recorded in the Netherlands in the year 1982. There is a link to the original metadata record. In this case, it used to be an IMDI record, which has been later on been converted to SIMDI. We'll get back to that later on. And the languages we are talking about here are Dutch and Arabic. There is a link to the metadata source, so you can always click here. And right now, this is pure XML. I won't go too deep into that, but this is just to show you that it's always possible to go from the Virtual Language Observatory to the original source of metadata. So here you will also recognize the fields, like for instance the name, we saw that back, and also this description. So this is basically rendered in the VLO. Okay, and then of course we get to the real relevant, well, let's say the most important parts of the metadata. And this is basically the links to the resources, because this is of course just a description about the language resource. Here we find 2 links to the language resource itself. And basically, I hope, okay, so this is for instance a chat file. You can immediately download it and then have a look at the contents of it. It's basically annotation file. Okay, and then we'll have a look at it. Save that one. Desktop. Here it is. And then we can have a look at the contents of this file. So here indeed we see some Dutch annotations from Arab learners in the Netherlands, just to indicate how quickly you can get to some relevant results using the facets search. Okay, going back to the Virtual Language Observatory, there is also possibility to use the Google Earth overlay. So if you have Google Earth installed on your computer, you can basically download this file and open it with Google Earth, and this will give you kind of okay, so the experience will not be optimal, nevertheless we will see something. There is the virtual globe.
There's too much ice on green.
It's not a recent.
So here we see now the contents of this virtual language observatory overlay. I restrict it very much here now because otherwise we will have way too many markers. But most important part here or one of the important parts, I think, is the possibility to browse by language. And of course, it always gives lots of discussions where exactly a place mark for a specific language should go. But at least it gives a kind of way of exploring, let's say, the information which is available through the metadata in a geographic way. So for instance, let's say we are interested in Dutch Sign Language, Nederlandse gebarentaal. We can click on this marker, click on this link, and we will get to part of the Virtual Language Observatory, and I will immediately open it up in the browser, then you see it better, with information about specific language. In this case, we see that the ISO 6393 language code for Dutch Sign Language is DSE. The name is Dutch Sign Language, and there are some links here. For instance, there's a very interesting link to information from the linguist list site, which basically will give us information about about this specific language, and also about the research which is being done on this. And so, for instance, we can immediately go through a list of dissertations which are related to Dutch Sign Language. Same goes for individual people who are working on this language. And in the same way, there are also links, for instance, to the World Atlas of Language Structures, which is a typological database. So you can, by a few clicks, see which kind of typological features a language has. Ethnologue. Also, Wikipedia has recently been added. But then, in this context, the most important link is, of course, the link to the Virtual Language Observatory. So we will click here now. And then we will be redirected to all the records in the Virtual Language Observatory which have as a language Dutch Sign Language. Which means that from now on we can use the facet search mechanism again to get through results. For instance, let's say we are interested in poetry. We can click here on the genre poetry, and we are restricted now to poetry in Dutch Sign Language. We can click again on the relevant records, and indeed we will see that there are some links here, in this case persistent identifiers, handles, to a video recording of some poetry. It's quite a large file, so I already downloaded it yesterday. I hope I have it here. Yeah, for instance, it's here. And then we can immediately have a look at this resource. So in this case, poetry in Dutch Sign Language. Okay, so this just as an example of the combination of geographic browsing and metadata search. Going back to the Virtual Language Observatory. As said, the other two things here are at this point less relevant, and certainly in this context. Most important thing to say about the language resource inventory is the fact that this is a kind of, let's say, fallback solution. If you cannot manage to create, let's say, if you have one metadata record that you want to submit, you have a corpus that you created as a researcher, so you have one metadata record, and you don't have a whole clearance center behind you, or if you don't have the possibilities to create, let's say, decent metadata, this is like a kind of fallback registry where you can enter some metadata, and then it will be converted later on to CMDI, and it will be made available in the Virtual Language Observatory. But again, I think this is a kind of fallback solution, and given the audience here in the room, I hope that none of you has to use this kind of fallback solution. So back to the real solutions, and that's indeed CMDI. As said already and demonstrated with these facets, they are a simple way to narrow down the search space. The values offered here are dynamic, so you only get values that really exist. If you, for instance, first select for modality spoken, and then the list of countries, for instance, will be restricted only to those countries which have metadata records for which there exists spoken language resources. And then the purpose is quickly navigating through a huge amount of metadata. I think that's already made clear. Okay. The Virtual Language Observatory, and especially the facet search, can also be used for metadata curation. It's also something that at the MPI here we have discovered, that it's an excellent tool to find out if there are any outliers for certain values. In that respect, I think I should quickly show you in the VLO, and then going back to the original part. If, for instance, you restrict the results to those of the MPI TLA archive here, and you go to the facet organization, and there are lots of results there, so I'll quickly go to there. And you know that the name of the institute here is Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics. You already can imagine there exist quite some variance in the way of noting down this value. You'll see that here all the values will appear which have been filled in the field organization. You'll see that the most standardized one, and quite some effort has been done to standardize towards this value, I think, is Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics. But immediately you also see the outliers. So you also see psycholinguistics, then between brackets MPI, you see naming in the Netherlands, all spelling mistakes which potentially exist. So in this way you can also quickly basically have a look at potentially erroneous metadata records using the facet search. Okay. So, and to basically finish this list, it's an important thing to remember that the Virtual Language Observatory is not a tool to answer research questions directly. It's rather a tool to quickly find something which might be relevant, and then there's plenty of other software out there which could help you in answering research questions, but the VLO certainly isn't. Okay, you've seen the faceted browser, this as well. Okay, so what is basically, let's say, behind the VLO facet search? Well, it is all metadata, and that's of course why this session is part of this today's workshop. It's all metadata in the component metadata infrastructure format, so the CMDI format. The sources that basically feed into the facet search are CMDI files harvested from Clarion centers. So I think that will also be the case for most of you here today, that you will be generating CMDI files, and they will be harvested afterwards, and they will be integrated automatically into the Virtual Language Observatory. Apart from that, there is also a collection of OLAC records, which are basically kind of extension of Dublin Core, but Alex will come back to that later on, so I won't go into the details. But basically, we do convert the OLAC records into CMDI, and then ingest them into the Virtual Language Observatory. And as shown, there's also this kind of fallback inventory, which is also converted into CMDI and then afterwards ingested into the VLO. Okay, and as said, one of the important features of this whole approach is that you have direct access, if available of course, to the resources which are described by the metadata. It's a very important thing. Also in terms of the end users, they don't, you know, people nowadays are basically raising in the Google generation, so they expect immediate results, so they don't want to be redirected 5,000 times, they want a direct link to the resources, and that's exactly what is possible in this context. Okay, so maybe it's time for a bit kind of interactive part of this session, so I would like to ask you to do this kind of small exercise, first starting the Virtual Language Observatory, and then to find two things. In the first instance, we'll try to locate the corpus Gijsling, which is a corpus of medieval Dutch, as far as I know. And then we're going to look for telephone conversations which were made in Nepal. This is all possible with the Virtual Language Observatory. I'll give you, let's say, like 2 minutes or well, 5 minutes, and then afterwards I'll show how to get to these resources in the VLO. Okay, so please go ahead, and in 5 minutes we'll get back to the results.
In the meantime, can you tell us how much data there is now in the VLO available?
There is at this point around, and coming back to that, around 500,000 metadata records. So that is, I don't know how much data that is in terms of the real data that is annotated there, but it's 500,000 of metadata records. It's growing, and of course there's a large difference in the granularity of the metadata descriptions in there. So you have certain metadata records which are describing a whole corpus. There are others which are describing just one single annotation file in the corpus. So that's also one of the challenges when looking through this huge amount of metadata, to see how granular certain metadata descriptions are. But again, as we are bringing together so many descriptions, it's very hard there to have a clear harmonization on the granularity level. It's rather a point of making it available, and then for the end user it has to be made clear that a certain metadata description is either about a very tiny amount of data or a large amount of data.
The big question I always have with this is that if you simply start harvesting as much metadata as you can get, is that it's very difficult to check the quality, so you always need a human interlocutor to interpret what you get back. It's not very useful for machines.
That's true. I think a very important part of the whole VLO is also indeed a kind of inspection and quality feedback on certain aspects of the metadata. And that's indeed, of course, you can do some kind of mechanical checks, like for instance checking if a language code is really part of the list of official language code. But when it comes down to, let's say, prose descriptions or really the content description of what is in there, I think it's unavoidable to have some kind of human check in the whole process as well. I think that's indeed something which is also to be considered like a never-ending struggle. Let's say the fight for metadata quality and for curation. In that respect, there is going to be, in the next release of the VLO, which can be any day now, there's going to be a kind of feedback option as well. So we basically built in a feedback form where people can click on a button and then they get redirected to a form where people can basically give some feedback to specific metadata records. It is to be seen how often it is going to be used, but at least it's very good because right now we've experienced quite a few times that people, as experts in their fields, see some mistakes, but they cannot immediately give that feedback to the people who created the metadata. So in this respect, I hope that, for instance, through the VLO, we can be a kind of mediator there also in terms of improving the metadata quality. So, but that's yeah, some future music.
Yeah.
Okay, well, one more minute and then I'll show. Okay, well, go to the. Okay, so first thing was the corpuscasling. Well, this is a pretty straightforward exercise. We just can do a full text search, for instance, omgäsling, and then we'll automatically get back two results. And well, this is kind of an on-purpose demonstration. Why do we get two results? Well, basically because apparently here the corpuscasling has been entered twice from two separate sources. So we'll click on it and see where the information comes from. And for instance, here this is a record that is provided by the INL, the Institute for Dutch Lexicology, providing information about corpuscasling. Also providing a link to it, so if we click here, we will get to the search engine in the corpuscasling. And then the other record was already in there before. This was part of the so-called LRT inventory. It's much less informative because, for instance, it does not contain a direct link to this search engine of the corpuscasling. So looking at this, this is probably one of the records that will be deleted from VLO because now it exists twice. But this is also a fact of life, so some resources are twice in there. And again, this is also something where we would like to ask for your assistance. So if you see things like this, please use this feedback button that is going to be integrated in the VLO so that we can fix this kind of double occurrences of metadata. But all in all, it took us just one keyword search to track down a corpus.
If you would have added corpus, you would have had one result. I'm not sure if that was the purpose.
think it was a literal search. So basically here you see corpus Gijsseling, which is the one that is found back, and this is the Gijsseling corpus. And so basically what it does just a string match. And as corpus Gijsseling is not the same string as Gijsseling corpus, you see indeed that there are some restrictions here, of course, in what you can find. I'll also get back to that, to the limits of searching with the Virtual Language Observatory. Okay, so this was the first simple thing. You can always go back to the first start page, so without any selection of the facets, by just clicking on the logo here, and then you will see that all the 500,000 records will show up again. So the second thing was what we were searching for were telephone conversations in Nepal. Now, one of the ways of working with such a facet thing is trying to, as quickly as possible, restrict the search space. So one very obvious field where we can restrict on is Nepal, because I guess there are not that many resources in there that come from Nepal. Exactly, well, 978. So we click here on Nepal, and then we can look through, for instance, genre and subject to look for telephone recordings. I have to see now, I think it actually will be one of the things which is hidden under subject. We can go to T, telephone recordings, and indeed, here we see telephone conversations. So you can click on it, and then go to one of the two metadata records. And indeed, this is part from corpus from the University of Leipzig with, well, basically a telephone conversation in Nepali. You see that when you click on the link here, you're redirected to a login screen. Of course, it does not mean that all records which are in the Virtual Language Observatory are descriptions of resources that are openly available. So for certain language resources, there are restrictions to the access. And of course, it's very hard to predict if something is open or not. We are currently also looking in having possibilities of adding a facet which basically indicates if something is openly available or not. But as there are many ways to indicate this in all of the available corpora and collections, it's something which is not so straightforward. So we are looking into this, but it's very well possible that if you are browsing through this, that you need to request access to certain resources. Okay, so that was it for these small exercises. I originally intended also to have some additional exercises, but given the time constraints, I'll skip these. But I think it's important to mention that this basically were two kinds of trick questions. So basically asking you to find, for instance, spoken discourse with at least two consultants in Asia, or a spoken discourse with at least two consultants in a face-to-face conversation. Things like finding at least two consultants are questions which cannot be answered by the facet browser. So in that respect, it's also very important to realize what the restrictions are. Most of them, in most of the cases, I think it's pretty clear what is possible, what isn't. But it's nevertheless important to realize these limits. And there are two kinds of limits to the facet search at this point. There are, first of all, the inherent limits. So it is really a simple search. You cannot find, let's say certain video recordings with 3 actors, of which 2 of the 3 actors are over 80 years old. Such kind of search questions cannot be answered by the Virtual Language Observatory. And it's also not possible to have kind of logical or Boolean operators, because well, you're basically always selecting one of the two, or one specific search parameter, and you cannot say, okay, I want to find either video recordings or sound recordings from the Netherlands. You always have to select one of them. Of course, you can select first the video recordings, have a look at the results, then go back to the facet browser, and then go to the sound recordings. But it's not possible to have logical OR combinations. So that are really the inherent limits. There are also some other limits, but this luckily is not an inherent one. That's a full text search. It's currently not done for all fields in the CMDI records. It's only done for the main fields which you can see when you browse through them. So that's things like name, description, country, language code, etc. We are planning, nevertheless, an extension of VLO so that it will really offer a possibility to search in all the fields of a Simplify. Okay, and then we get back to basically the background of the Virtual Language Observatory, and that's the whole CMDI architecture. This is a kind of diagram that will come back over the day a few more times. And basically what you see here is the whole, let's say, cycle from the metadata modeling to the creation of the metadata to, let's say, the storage of the metadata in a local metadata repository. So that could be one of the Clarion NL centers in which you are active, or the Clarion centers. Then the metadata will be harvested in so-called joint metadata repository and will be made available for search. When we have a look at this kind of overview, this is the part where the VLO comes in. So it's basically a kind of metadata catalog, and you can search in all of the metadata that has been created into this cycle. I won't go into all the steps of the cycle right now, because that's exactly what the next sessions are about. Some technical mumbo jumbo. I think I will go very quickly over this, because this is not the intention of the day to give you a complete technical insight, but I'll mention some of the technologies that have been used in the backend. So basically the VLO is a Tomcat web application. It's written in Java. It uses a very fast XML parser. And okay, so this is the kind of overview about how the data flows are really working. So right now, and the numbers have already increased in the meantime, so there are already more CMDI providers. So basically we are harvesting CMDI providers, so the Clarion centers, and there are OLAC providers. For the OLAC providers, we are running an extra conversion with XSLT to SIMD. So basically that results in about 35,000 metadata records. And there are about, and in the meantime it's a little bit more, about 400,000 native CMDI records. These 500 records are brought together and are ingested, so imported into the Virtual Language Observatory. An important connection there is the fact that all of these SIMD records have links in their profiles, we'll get back to that later on, to ISOCAT, which is a data category registry which basically contains the definitions. And this is important because these SIMD records are not necessarily all having the same structure. There are some records in there, let's say for spoken corpora, there are some records in there which are describing, let's say, lexica. And they are all semantically mapped onto these facets using the ISOCAT data category registry. Again, Inke is going to tell us something about that later on. So yeah, VLO and the ISOCAT are natural allies in that respect, because you have this kind of semantic mapping. But again, this is not something to go into too deep detail here. This is also too technical, basically indicating that these facets are bound to a data category. So if later on you ask, okay, why do we have all this mess with creating data categories and using the data categories? Well, for instance, the mapping to the facets and to the content search in the Virtual Language Observatory is a very good reason to work with data categories. Okay, then coming to the question, how can I get my data into the Virtual Language Observatory? Well, the main answer to that, and I've put it in a larger font here, is provide your metadata as CMDI records and make them available over OAI PMH for harvesting. These are some fallback options, but I will not go into detail about them, because the best way of doing it is providing your metadata directly over OAI PMH. This is about what is happening in the backend. I'm not going to comment to it in too much detail. There is a link on the VLO site to a paper on LREC where this whole process is described. So how the mapping of CMDI records to the facets, for instance, takes place. It's quite a sophisticated process. It might be interesting if you have some kind of technical background, or if you really want to see the fine details of the working of the VLO, but again, I think it's too much detail for here now. Some recent additions to the VLO were the language information. You've all seen that. There is the addition of descriptions in the listing of the individual records. I'll just select something here. So here you have now both the name and a short description, so it makes it more easy to select something relevant in the end. There is the addition of the national project facets. I've also shown that, and something which is going to be added is this feedback link. Some other things to come. Well, curation, that's a never-ending story. It's something which is never fixed. More CMDI metadata, obviously, because more and more Clarion centers are either converting or creating their metadata to CMDI, so the amount of metadata records will for sure increase. There are also plans for some other facets, like for instance this openness facet, and also kind of a year constraint. Human readable handling. So right now you've seen that the persistent identifiers were often a bit cryptic. One of the future additions to the VLO will be possibility to see what really the file name is to which there is referred, even when you are using a persistent identifier. And then there are also general interface improvements on the planning. Okay, so this brings us to the end of this presentation. If you have questions, feel free to ask them now. You can always also send a mail to vlw@clarion.eu, and more information can be found at clarion.eu/VLO for the Virtual Language Observatory, and in general for CMDI at clarion.eu/CMDI. So thank you, and if you have any questions, this is the time to ask them.
Okay, thank you, Dieter. Maybe one or two questions, because we have a lot of time this morning. No questions?
One maybe.
Okay.
You said that the search is limited to simple string matching, but because we saw that you use Apache Solid in the background, that could be made more extensive, like
Yes.
Suzy search.
Yeah, we are currently using the search box in a very basic way. We are constantly looking at improving things like that. So it might be possible that there might be addition of certain Boolean operators maybe in the search thing, and also prediction. So that's also one of the things. I think the Meritus Institute has a nice facet browser also for their CMDI metadata. And they've integrated one of the Solar features that there is a kind of predictive typing. So when you start typing, let's say COR, then it automatically will suggest you corpus or whatever, so that you can get more feedback from the search system. So yes, we're constantly looking at potential extensions, and if you have suggestions or ideas there, feel free to let us know about it, because it's always good to get some input from others.
Okay, thank you.
Was another question?
No, I didn't see them.
Facets. Do you guarantee the trueness of this? Are they true facets? I mean, for instance, country, some study can take part or have a subject in the Netherlands and in Germany, for instance, if it's on board. Are they true facets, or do you have
What's the truth?
something in between?
If a value appears in the facets, like Germany, there is kind of guarantee that Germany is at least once appearing in the original metadata record. It could, however, be that it's not the only value. So it could be that also the Netherlands is in that facet. So in that respect, it's not a completely exclusive facet.
Yeah.
That's true. So if you define a true facet as being an exclusive facet, then it are not true facets. It's a kind of semi-facet. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dieter. So remember, all this functionality, all this wonderful functionality is only there if you keep